He is a wannabe Chavez, but I would say degrees lower in IQ. He speaks a lot and he also likes to rant a lot, but he doesn't execute anything, not even his own plan. So Colombia is going to turn towards more of a pro-business government. And then definitely the equity market is going to benefit. You have really attractive opportunities. For example, the largest banks in the country, Colombia or Davivienda, are extremely undervalued at between 5 to 7x price to earnings. And you also have the national oil company is trading at about 4x EBITDA.
With Western markets overheating, a lot of smart investors are beginning to look at emerging markets for value. And it's no wonder. Emerging markets are trading at one of the lowest levels relative to developed markets in decades. The question is really, where within that universe should you position your capital? Today I'm talking to Ricardo Gonzalez from Convexo Capital, who makes a pretty compelling case for Colombia of all places. It turns out that the country will see a major transition that's highly likely to lift stocks, a national event-driven opportunity. Now, remember, this is not investing advice, and it's not an offer to sell securities or access to this fund. I just want to present you with this unique opportunity to hear from a local Colombian investor on why the country should be on your radar. Make sure to see our full disclosure at the end of this interview. And if you're not already, take a moment right now to subscribe, because each week I'll present you with a new high conviction event-driven opportunity. Now, Ricardo Gonzalez. You spotted an opportunity in the market that basically nobody else knows about or nobody else is talking about. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so basically the opportunity I'm gonna give first a global perspective, and then I'm gonna go to the local perspective. And it is that globally there has been a surge in a new asset class, or there has been a rising asset class that is called search funds. And just to give a little bit of context before talking about search funds, you generally have, like, for example, investing in the market, in the public market, you invest in the S&P 500, for example. You have other asset classes such as private equity or venture capital or hedge funds. But then during the last decades, you have seen the rise of search funds globally, mainly in the US, but also in Europe, Spain, and to a lesser degree in Latin America. And basically the opportunity is so large because there was a recent study by INSEAD in Spain that says, for example, that the S&P 500 has had a return during the past couple of decades of 10%, and private equity and venture capital has had a return between 12 and 15%, but then search funds have had a return of 25%, over the last couple of decades. And this is because basically the opportunity exists because there is a generation of boomers that want to retire and have a small or medium enterprise, and they don't have any succession plan that they can put in place. So their kids are doing other businesses. They are not interested in running their parents' businesses. So this has become what it's called the silver tsunami. That a lot of boomers are transitioning and wanting liquidity for their companies. And basically search funds provide that opportunity for investors to invest in this type of companies, and for operators who have been operating for decades to exit their companies. And this is the new asset class that has been emerging. And basically the main difference with private equity is that in this asset class, the searchers or the partners of the search fund become the managers of the company or of the companies that they acquire. So they basically have way more agency in terms of the decisions that they make at the company. And then this is the global context. But to sweeten things up a bit more, here in Colombia, this asset class is virtually unexplored, and you have really few search funds that have acquired a company here in Colombia. And this sweetens a lot more the opportunity because you have a rising new asset class, but you also have a really underserved market in terms of search funds. And then the fact that approximately 70% of companies in Colombia are both a small or medium enterprise and are owned by a family or partially owned by a family. So basically, 70% of the companies universe in Colombia would be target for a search fund. So this is a really attractive opportunity here in Colombia, and also because you have really strong positioning geographically here in the country, because you can, for example, have advantages for nearshoring to the US or to Europe and provide services and products to those markets. So it's really an amazing opportunity in the global context, but also in the local context.
And especially now because, the US is kind of separating from China, so it's looking for other partners to provide services and goods and stuff like that.
Definitely.
And then also, I was just checking out the population pyramid of Colombia, and it's quite steep. You look at a lot of these developed countries, and what you find is that they tend to be top heavy, or
Yeah.
there's a good chunk of older population compared to the younger population. But in Colombia, it's pretty much like a pyramid, it kind of lives up to its name, population pyramid. I guess that there's probably more and more people that are kind of entering that silver zone in Colombia. And so, the opportunity is getting greater and greater.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, and it's the sense that we get day to day, that, for example, you have a lot of sellers that come to us that say, "Hey, I have another friend that is also he's also wanted to retire since a couple of years ago, and he wants to speak with you guys." So it's something that we're seeing day to day. And the fact that, for example, here in Colombia, and maybe we can chat a bit more about this in the next couple of minutes, but here in Colombia, like, you sense a little bit of pessimism, especially from locals. So when you have
Mhm.
another perspective and you have a perspective of other international investors that have that confidence in Colombia in the long term, like, you say, "Hey, I want to buy your company," they are like, "Hey, really?" Because they want to exit, but they don't have any sort of options in terms of liquidity.
It's kind of a capital starved market.
Definitely, or a buyer's market. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Event Driven Daily. If you're spending too much time trying to uncover special situation stocks, make sure to look at Event Driven Daily's Morning Brew newsletter. Each month, we scour the internet to find as many special situation opportunities as possible, and then send each and every special situation to free subscribers in a neatly packaged email. This service is absolutely free and will save you hours each month trying to source special situation ideas. Go to www.eventdrivendaily.com and look for the subscribe button at the top of the page. That's www.eventdrivendaily.com. And there is quite a bit of pessimism about the company or about the country right now.
Yeah. Maybe just to give a little bit more context. So Colombia, of course, has a past of really strong war inside the country. I don't know, 30 to 40 years back, and then during the last 20 years, the country has improved dramatically, and the security in the country is way better. But we had a minor setback in terms of in the 2022 elections, in which basically the country elected a not so pro-business government, a left-leaning government, and this basically the business community in the country said that it was going to be the end of Colombia, and it was going to become the next Venezuela, and so on and so forth. But in reality, this has only led to extreme pessimism, and in my opinion, unfounded pessimism, because what you have seen, in fact, in Colombia is that you have really solid institutions that have proven those check and balances for the current government. So, for example, most of the reforms that the government has proposed have not been approved at all. So the institutions and, for example, the central bank in the country has proven again its independence, and just the institutions have proven to be really strong. And also, the current government's approval rate is at record lows. So this increases dramatically the probability of a change of direction in the coming election next year. And this means that, for example, you have a really attractive window of opportunity between now and the next elections, because you basically can take advantage of the fact that there is rampant pessimism in the country from locals. But then in reality, and at least in my opinion, you have really solid institutions in the country that have proven that they can be that balance to any kind of government. So governments on the right and governments on the left. So in my opinion, this only proves that Colombia is one of the most solid countries in the region. And this is also something that sophisticated investors have begun to pick up. So, for example, you have international private equity firms such as Advent, Pegasus, Aecon International, and other billionaires that have invested significant amounts of capital in the country and that have made acquisitions and really large acquisitions in the past couple of months and years. But the reality is that there is a segment in the market of smaller deals and smaller companies that is already too crowded with pessimism, and that's an opportunity for the ones that are taking advantage of this, such as ourselves at Convexo Capital. Yeah.
I would say that most investors, well, Colombia is basically off the radar of most investors. They just,
Yeah,
yeah, they
definitely.
just don't even think about it. But actually, Colombia's been a democracy for what, 100 years?
Yeah, it has, and to be honest, it's being one of the best performing democracies in the region. So even because of all of the things that have happened in Colombia, it's still functioning, you know?
Mhm.
So, for example, in other countries in Latin America, you have had dictatorial governments, and you have also had countries such as Argentina that have defaulted on their debt. This has not happened in Colombia. And, you know, the fact that it is so visible what is wrong with Colombia proves that it is one of the most functioning countries in the region, because you can see the flaws, you know, you can see that, hey, you have security flaws, of course, and you have things to improve, of course, but the country still functions and has been functioning for the last decades, even despite all of its problems, you know. So I would say it's one of the most functional countries in the region.
Right. So the silver tsunami
Yeah.
and the pessimism about the country right now and about its presidents kind of painting a very it's kind of painting the picture of opportunity here because as that kind of unfolds and a new president comes in to take power, then supposedly the market should do better and the companies might even do better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's our hypothesis, and that's what we are striving for. Yeah,
So the guy who's in now, is he kind of like wannabe Chavez, or what's he like?
yeah, he is. I want to be Chavez, but I would say degrees lower in IQ. You know, uh, to put it elegantly. But yeah, I would say he's a wannabe, but he's more of a non-execution guy, you know. So he speaks a lot, and he wants to also likes to rant a lot and speak but bad of everybody, but he doesn't execute anything, not even his own government plan. So he's just basically a non-executioner, I would say. Yeah,
So he's a big talker, in other words.
he is.
So our viewers are mostly retail investors or small funds. How would
Yeah.
they take advantage of these trends in Colombia?
Yeah, so I would say that you have two options basically. And the first one is that if you're a small fund and you want to invest in Colombia or take advantage of this opportunity, you can invest in search funds or invest in private equity firms and search funds like ourselves, and you can take advantage of this opportunity. Or you could also do minority investments in private companies in Colombia, but then you're not going to be you're not going to have the upside that you have with operators that are operating the company day to day. And I would say that the other option that an investor has is, for example, investing in the Colombia's equity market. This can be done easily for a retail investor, and you have really attractive opportunities. For example, you have the largest banks in the country, Colombia or Davivienda, which are extremely undervalued at 7x price to earnings, or between 5 to 7x for the banks. And you also have, for example, the national oil company is trading at about 4x EBITDA. So these are attractive valuations. Of course, this does not mean that they are going to re-rate, or that the multiple is going to re-rate, but it's definitely attractive. And you also have other options in ETFs, and currently with some investors are sort of turning towards emerging markets. You could also take advantage of this opportunity by investing in ETFs that track emerging markets, I would say. Yeah.
For you guys, what advantage does investing in private businesses have over investing in public companies?
So I would say, and let me speak just specifically about Colombia, and I would say that here in Colombia, the investable universe for our retail investors in the public market is really, really small. So there are, I would say, less than 80 companies that are publicly traded in Colombia, and the ones that are really liquid are maybe less than 10 companies. So these 10 companies would be the super blue chip companies, the large supermarket chains, the national oil company, the banks, and other types of commodity companies. But if you want to invest in this market, you don't have many companies to choose from. And then if you go to the private market, yes, of course, you're going to sacrifice some liquidity, but you're going to have way more agency in the decisions that the company is going to make. And especially if you are investing in search funds, because you you're going to get a seat at the table, and then you're going to have a chance to improve the company. And also because this allows the investors to enjoy more upside in the companies that are currently private, because they can grow, they can have a disciplined capital allocation mindset. They're going to be joined by investors that are really experienced in this asset class, and in all of the region and globally. So it's really an advantage right now to invest in private markets. And also because in the public markets, first, you don't have a large investable universe, and second, you're going to have like only super blue chip companies that are probably reaching the top, or the top boundary of their potential. And then you're going to have like the upside that smaller companies have.
So is it possible to find closely held companies in Colombia that are trading in the public markets, or is that kind of something you want to avoid in Colombia?
I would say, and maybe this is polemic, but I would say that I would avoid it in Colombia, and not because anything bad, but it's just in terms of cultural dynamics. I would say that minority shareholders are not so taken into account when making decisions, especially in public companies. So, for example, if you have a public company that has a really small float, then the minority investors are not going to be really taken into account. And you also don't have that mindset that it's prevalent in the US, for example, to unlock value. So, for
Hmm.
example, if you have a company that is trading at I don't know, 4x EBITDA, then you're gonna have investors really pushing for a spin-off, doing something, buybacks or something, or just pushing for a catalyst, or a way to unlock value. That culture is not present at all in Colombia. Like for example, you have these trading groups, the large banks. They are just starting to notice these trends, and they are just proposing new ways to unlock value. But this is not a culture that is uh, present in the country, mainly because the large companies that trade in the stock market are just focused on operating their companies and on day-to-day execution, and they see the investor side of the public market as a formality, but not so much like hey, this really can unlock value.
Hmm. Definitely. Now, Colombia's been in a civil war, well, effectively a civil war for decades. How does this kind of affect the markets or affect the opportunity there?
Definitely. So I would say that it does affect, and it's primarily in investor confidence in the country and the perception of risk in the country. This, of course, diminishes dramatically the amount of capital that is available in the country. And however, I would say that Colombia has improved materially for the last couple of decades. And I wouldn't say that we're currently in a civil war. We were for a lot of time during the last century, but I would say that especially during the last 20 to 30 years, we have improved them dramatically, and Colombia is now a way safer country than it was before. And just what I was saying before, that despite all of its flaws, Colombia still functions, and that proves that it's one of the most functional countries in the region, one that has not had any dictatorial governments, any default on its debt. It has its problems, but their problems are really visible, and despite all of that, it functions. So I would say that it affects overall the business climate in terms of confidence, but we're still going, and the country it has a really strong business community.
Right, and there's been a peace treaty signed or a peace agreement signed with the FARC
Yeah,
basically in the last 10 years, I believe it was. So that war has kind of come to an end now. And I think that's something that not a lot of people realize. Now that a lot of the fighting is over, Colombia is quite a bit safer than it has been in the past. When we're talking about investing, though, what about minority shareholder rights, rule of law?
yeah.
What's that like in Colombia? This episode is brought to you by NetNet Hunter, the best resource for NetNet stock investing on the internet. NetNets, or cigar butts, are sub liquidation value stocks that produced such outstanding returns during Ben Graham's lifetime that he gave up all other strategies to focus on them. Professionals such as Warren Buffett and Joel Greenblatt also launched their career on the strategy, and that proved quite successful to say the least. Right now, you can get a free monthly NetNet stock pick from NetNet Hunter's free newsletter. Visit www.netnethunter.com and look for the link on the homepage.
Yeah, so maybe to answer that question, I can make a gross oversimplification and just to share how I think about it. But I would say that there are basically two Colombias. The first one is the one that is located in urban areas, the one that has the main cities, where the culture is extremely international and cosmopolitan, and so on, and where rule of law pretty much functions effectively. And then you have the second Colombia, in which it's more of a countryside, the rural Colombia, and in this area you have definitely challenges in terms of rule of law and in terms of I don't know, just the professionalization of businesses, you know. And but I would say that in terms of the first Colombia, the one that is located in the main cities and so on, it's really international standards, especially for businesses as such as the ones that we're looking at. And basically, rule of law and property rights are similar to the U.S., but I would say that they concede a little bit more territory to employees instead of employers,
Interesting.
different than the US. And I would say that it also provides a little bit more protection to tenants instead of the property owners. But I wouldn't say that it is dramatically different, just in terms of defense mechanisms for tenants and employees, and maybe in terms of compensation and what the effective cost to company that it is for a company to have employees. So I would say I would make those differences. And then in terms of minority shareholders, I would say it is just a cultural thing, the thing that we were speaking about, minority shareholders not being taken into account when they propose, for example, unlocking value through a spin-off or these sort of proposals. I would say those are the main differences.
Right. I mean, it's not like, a retail investor in the US is going to go to Colombia and take a company to court or take management to court or something like that. But if you're investing in the London AIM or you're investing in Canada or something like that, then there tends to be take unders. So management tend to spot the value in the company and propose low bids and try and take the company private and force shareholders out. What's it like in Colombia?
I would say that it does not happen from within, or at least it's not that common. So you don't see a lot of management buyouts or these sort of proposals. What I have seen happen is, this has happened recently, is that an outside investor or large conglomerate tries to take over another one. So, for example, you had here in Colombia, you had the GEA, which is the Grupo Empresarial Antioqueño, which is a really large conglomerate here in Colombia. They have like three or four companies that are listed in the stock exchange, and they basically had a really tight structure in which it was not possible to do a hostile takeover because they had ownership, crossed ownership between the subsidiaries. But then there comes Jaime Gilinski, which is a Colombian billionaire. He has basically a large bank here in the country, and he has investments in the UK and so on and so forth. And he comes and he does a hostile takeover of Nutresa, which is one of the largest food companies here in the country. So I would say that it does not happen from within, but it tends to happen from coming from another large conglomerate, you know?
Mhm.
And we have not seen any, to my knowledge, any investment firms that come and do a hostile takeover or a proposal for firms that are publicly traded. Just besides maybe Brookfield that acquired a really large company here in Colombia, but not it's not that common, I would say.
Okay, so you're going to see a change in the political climate in Colombia. Probably the president who's deeply unpopular is going to be thrown out and replaced with somebody who's just a little bit more, I guess, capitalistic or business friendly. Do you expect the public equities in Colombia to also see significant gains because of that change?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that actually the equity market in Colombia has been a leading indicator for this change. So, for example, just this year, the Colombian equity index has increased a little bit more than 20%, while, for example, the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq have increased a little bit less than 4%. So definitely uh, you're gonna see this reflected in public equity valuations, and I think that it's gonna be even more evident in the coming months because the geopolitical landscape is going to settle a little bit. The election probabilities are going to settle a little bit, so it's going to become more and more clear that Colombia probably is going to turn towards more of a pro-business government, and then definitely the equity market is going to benefit. And I think there's going to be a dispersion for the super blue chip companies that, for example, the national oil company could be really benefiting from this, and also the large banks because they are really undervalued at 5x price to earnings. That's really low. So you could see a dispersion in terms of the winners and the losers. But I would say that overall, the equity market is definitely going to take advantage of this.
I know it's something that Jeremy Grantham has been saying for quite a long time, well, a few years anyways, is that the emergency the emerging markets are going to
Yeah.
be the place to be for the next decade because the American markets or even just markets in the West generally are so overvalued that there's and if you look at, the history of emerging markets to developed markets, emerging markets are probably the most depressed that they've been in, I don't know, 50 years, something like that. And they're definitely oversold. So you have this cyclical tailwind as money shifts into emerging markets. And then you also have the unique Colombian business factors or economic political factors that are really going to propel stocks there. So that's quite interesting, quite an interesting setup. Now, for you personally, how did you get into investing? Were you somebody who, at the age of 5, you were reading Ben Graham or Warren Buffett's letters or something like that? Did you have your first stock at 11? How
No,
did you get into
not
it?
that young, not that young. I wish, but basically, just to share a little bit about my story in investing. I both my parents are accountants, so I basically was always immersed in the financial discussion at least, and you know that Colombia has a fiscal reform every 2 years or a little bit less sometimes. So always at the dinner table, we were speaking about fiscal reform and so on. So maybe that's why I got interested. And at university, I basically was really obsessed with this. And then since I took classes in accounting and then um, in finance and capital markets, I just became really obsessed. Read everything that there was at the university. I also started reading Buffett and Munger and the usual suspects. And then I would say that what really was a catalyst for me was reading Nassim Taleb,
Hmm.
which also provides really a strong foundation for the philosophy that we apply nowadays. So I would say that it is just the merge of Buffett plus Munger and then Taleb. Buffett and Munger about preserving capital, growing capital, and being disciplined, and then Taleb on being exposed to optionality, being exposed to convexity, and to growing exponentially. So I became really obsessed with that, and then as I just got into the financial ecosystem here in Colombia, just getting into investment banking and learning about how businesses work and how to think about businesses in terms of in financial terms. I just became really obsessed, and I just love the fact that businesses you can learn about anything. It's really integral. You can learn about marketing, psychology, economics, operations, and you have to learn about so many different things that I became really obsessed, and I really liked learning. So that's why I became really fascinated with finance. And then I would say that I have also had uh, the luck and the opportunity to have really wonderful mentors. So, for example, um, Cinco Capital, which was the search fund that I worked at here in Colombia, they really are really mentors for me, and they taught me about getting off the Excel sheet and going into real life, and how
Hmm.
to think about businesses in real life, like how to take decisions. And then also when I worked at Arauca Capital, the hedge fund that is based out of Europe, that is also managed by a Colombian. Um, this was really a catalyst for me in terms of investing, and he's also a great mentor of me, Jean-Philippe Tissot. And basically, my investment journey started since I graduated from university. I started investing my own money, and then nowadays investing my own money plus investors' money. Currently, one of the founding partners of Convexo Capital, which is a search fund based out of Colombia, and basically looking to acquire companies uh, that are between or more than $1 or $2 million in EBITDA. And our investment philosophy is basically can be summarized by our name, which is Convexo. It is convex in Spanish, and basically our philosophy has two branches. The first one is that you first have to preserve capital, and then the second one is that you have to grow capital. And the way that we do this is that first we preserve capital by acquiring businesses that have recurring revenue, that have low leverage, that can be acquired with extreme price discipline. So the entry price that we look for is extremely attractive because we need a large margin of safety for us to preserve the capital of our investors. And then the second branch is about growing capital. And in this, we look for businesses that have a real strong optionality. And for example, businesses that can expand to other geographies, that can grow into other verticals, or have these optionality levers that you can execute. And this is basically the philosophy of the fund, in which you have And it's basically a convex curve in which you have the preserve branch and then the grow branch. And that's basically about me and what I'm doing currently.
So tell me, who do your investors tend to be for your fund? And if somebody's interested, how would they go about contacting you?
Sure. So our investors are mainly family offices in the region, so in Latin America and also in Europe and the US. And we also have institutional funds. So, for example, alternative asset class funds that invest in this type of businesses or endeavors. And we also have high net worth individuals that are really familiar with the M&A ecosystem in Colombia or in the region. We also have former searchers or former partners at search funds that invest in us. And we also have like specialized funds that are dedicated to search funds. And finally, we do have other high net worth individuals that are interested in the asset class that say, hey, this is really an interesting opportunity. I have not heard about this, but I know you. I have known your experience. Like I know how you work, and they have invested in us. So I would summarize that these are the types of investors that we have, and then how people can contact me. They can email me at ricardo at convexo3 the number 3.com, and they can also contact me through LinkedIn, Ricardo Gonzalez, or also I'm in Twitter, but not that active. It's at the handle is Ricardo G underscore 77 in case people want to contact me. So yeah, that's it.
Great. And we'll have those details in the show notes. Great talking to you today, Ricardo. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Evan.